All right. I am very excited to introduce our next speaker, Maggie Morganti, and I believe even more excited is the entire Beer ISAC channel, who is just rooting you on, ready to go. They are anxious for this talk to begin. Maggie is a product research, security researcher at Schneider Electric. Many would have familiarity with her or possibly have in line kind of her work at Oak Ridge National Laboratories, where she performed cybersecurity research for power systems, or you may know her from her previous work as an ICS threat intelligence analyst at FireEye, or you may know her from the Beer ISAC. Me personally, when I see kind of the career move and changes and the things that are happening, it's really, really exciting to see someone with Maggie's experience bring that depth of knowledge and perspective into a great kind of organization like Schneider as well. And her talk today, I think, is going to highlight some of those unique perspectives and challenges that she's kind of facing with Schneider, with vendors, and with that OEM side, as she talks about vendor supply chain challenges in a increasingly fragmenting world. Maggie, welcome. And I do as well hope someday we are in Wyoming for a ICS conference or meeting. Thank you, yeah. And I turn the virtual stage over to you.
Yeah, thank you for that intro, Tim. That was super nice. Yeah, and as he alluded to, I'm actually giving this talk from just outside Yellowstone National Park, so hence some of the more Western-looking decor you see in the background here. So yeah, as Tim said, my name is Maggie Morganti, and I am a product security researcher at Schneider. And I'm just so grateful to get to be one of the last people to welcome all of you to the SANS ICS Summit this year. It's very exciting the way they set it up. I'm super happy that they made it free for everyone so that, you know, lots of new faces were able to attend. So this is great. But yeah, I'm going to be talking to you guys today about vendor security in a fragmenting world. And the reason that I really wanted to talk about this is there's a one-word question that vendors are increasingly going to have to answering in the future 1 to 5, 10 years. And that question is where? Where was this product manufactured? Where was this code developed? Where was this code signed? Where was this firmware developed? And then for every individual component inside your bill of materials, it's just where? And we have to account for that now. And that presents some really interesting and exciting challenges for vendors and also for everyone who partners with us to really rise to the occasion and meet this for the customers that we work with in different regions of the world. So that's really kind of the down and dirty of what we're going to be talking about here today. So there we go. So again, they duplicated my title slide, so apologies for that. So how this is going to go, Tim pretty much covered my bio, so we can pretty quickly just kind of work right through that. And then because this presentation covers topics that each could be a presentation in and of themselves, we're going to scope it a little bit just so that you guys kind of know what we're getting into. I'm going to give a little bit of background about what I mean when I say things like internet fragmentation or balkanization of the internet, because I know that some of you may be here in this talk because those aren't familiar terms to you. And that's perfectly okay. We're going to give kind of a 101 level, very quick kind of background into just what we mean when we talk about this, if that's a new topic to you. And then we're going to talk about who should care about this, because I think that there's some misconceptions about who this affects. And then we're going to get right into some of the challenges this presents to vendors specifically in securing their supply chains and also their secure development life cycles in this space. We'll close out by doing some solutions and path forward, and I'm hoping, I rehearsed this a bunch with the timer, to leave plenty of time for you guys to ask questions, because that's always the best part of giving a talk like this, is the interaction at the end and really just trying to have that conversation with people around this topic. So a little bit about me. I know that sometimes in this space, vendors can get a little bit of an interesting reputation. So I wanted to make my bio slide very bright and bright and vibrant for y'all. One of the key points, so Tim pretty much went through all of this except for what I tend to think of as the most important part of my bio, and that is, I like to joke with all of my friends that I was raised by a clan of feral engineers, and that was really the genesis of my interest in this space. Growing up, my dad was a manufacturing engineer and then a petroleum engineer, so I really grew up at a very young age. I was a curious kid, walking around shop floors and asking questions, walking around well sites and asking questions, and learning how all of this worked. So that's really kind of how I got led into this industry. I got a master's degree in intelligence studies that I focused pretty heavily on ICS security. And then, as Tim mentioned, went on to FireEye, then Oak Ridge, and then most recently Schneider Electric, which I've been there about 2 months now. I'm very, very excited about that. They have a really great team there that's just been an absolute joy to work with so far. And then a little bit of a disclaimer. So when we talk about internet fragmentation and balkanization of the internet, and I'll get to exactly kind of what I mean by those in just a minute, but a lot of these talks center around a lot of what you're seeing. Sorry, there we go. A lot of what you're going to see in this left column here. So a lot of them are policy talks that are really kind of centered on regional distrust and policies and lobbying for different policies. And there's absolutely a time and a place for having those discussions. But what I'd really like to do for kind of the next 20, 25 minutes is just put all of that aside and look at this from a vendor, country, regional agnostic standpoint and talk about how this is actually going to affect your practitioners, how this is going to affect people on your team, both as a vendor, and also as anyone who works with vendors, because this is going to affect you guys as well, when we're going through, some of the changes that we're going to be going through for this. So I put a sort of a mission statement in my mind on this slide that our goal as practitioners is to help inform policy, but it's also to work towards security solutions as a global community, no matter what the policy of the day may be. And I wanted to be fully transparent here that this was not a mindset that kind of came initially easy to me. My graduate degree and then also my time at the National Lab was very US national security focused. And I want to give a huge kudos to SANS right now for doing this kind of global follow the sun, because it plays right into this, right? It's this whole idea that, whatever the relationships between different governments may be and different policies may be, there are ICS security professionals in all different roles in all different countries, and we are all really working to try to provide the best security that we can for our customers in those regions, and also for the populations that rely on the critical infrastructure working in those regions. And so I promised you guys to do a little bit of background about what I mean by internet fragmentation and balkanization. I'll probably use those interchangeably throughout this presentation. So just know that when I say one or the other, I mean the same thing. And all of that internet fragmentation really boils down to is because there is, kind of geopolitical regional distrust. It has really led to a movement by different countries and different regions of the world to kind of digitally fence off their data and their digital spaces. And this happens in a few different ways. The first one is the actual technical implementations. So things like BricsNet, that was a project to run dedicated, owned, and managed fiber optic cable between the BRICS countries, which for those of you who don't know it, it's perfectly fine, are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Similarly, Russia has, kind of repeatedly tried to stand up this RUNET initiative, which is a movement to be able to completely disconnect Russia's internet from the public internet if they deem that that's necessary at any point in time. And then also things like China's Great Firewall, which is their, kind of very technical networking level way of buoying off their digital space. And then in addition to, kind of the networking level controls like this, and a little closer to home, we have things like governmental policy. So when the US decided that they were no longer going to do business with a Chinese technology company like Huawei. And then more recently, the Executive Order 13920, and what we're seeing now is the reworking of that executive order that took that sort of idea about supply chains in certain regions of the world and applied it to the power grid. And this executive order was actually very, very interesting from this standpoint, because previously, most of this kind of internet fragmentation and data sovereignty was really shifted towards privacy, towards securing the privacy of data. And this executive order really, for the American people at least, started applying this to things like critical infrastructure, which I think is super important for everyone attending this conference, that this is sort of a direction the trend is going. And with these technical and governmental aspects, kind of vying in this space, what happens is that people like us in the commercial sector are all of a sudden, kind of responsible for playing by these rules if we're doing business in these countries. So, if you're doing business in the US or Russia or China, all of a sudden your customers are asking you for different things, and you have to figure out a way to help them meet whatever supply chain security means to them, which is really kind of what we're going to be talking about here with this talk. And at this point, a few of you may be saying, okay, Meg, that sounds great, but this really sounds like an issue for my CISO. Why am I here? I'm not a CISO. And that's a great question, because this is absolutely an issue that your CISO is going to be running into, but it's also an issue for everyone whose team it affects. And that is not only on the vendor side, that's also everyone that we partner with, all of the utilities and different industrial control customers that we support, and different regulatory bodies are all going to be touched by this in one way or another, kind of as these policies move forward. And so I think it's really important to be talking about that now with our teams, so that we can best prepare to work with this sort of framework. And so a lot of times when you talk about supply chain security, it really is very much this sort of under the hood, what's under the hood with your products. So things like data localization and all of your bills of materials, the hardware bill of materials, firmware bill of materials, software bill of materials, for any of you who aren't familiar with HBOM, FBOM, or SBOM, and then also things like cryptography. So when we talk about data localization, what I'm really referring to here is that ICS vendors are kind of increasingly starting to put cloud-reliant solutions in their products. And some of these are great. They're really cool solutions. They do slick things. But when you're all of a sudden working in this space where different customers work in different regions and they're trying to fence things off digitally, all of a sudden we have to start thinking that that data needs somewhere to be processed, and that data needs somewhere to be handled. And we may need to have dedicated assets in a certain region so that that data has somewhere locally to go to be processed and handled. And that can feel very straightforward, but one of the roadblocks here that I would really like everyone who's in a role that might deal with this to think about is, if I all of a sudden need a different place for that data to go regionally, I also have to make sure that that dedicated place that data is being handled regionally is as secure, if not more secure, than where I was originally going to have it processed out of. So all of a sudden, this kind of becomes an extra layer of consideration in the supply chain for the cloud-based services that we're using. And then, of course, we can't talk about supply chain without talking about the different bill of materials. So where are your different components sourced from? With the recent executive order, there seems to be a shift towards, at least on the US side, reshoring things. So reshoring manufacturing for grid components. And I would venture to guess that eventually we're going to see that not only for we want a bill of materials for where was everything manufactured, but we're also going to be getting that for the software. Where was the software written? Where was the software signed? Where was the cryptography done? Where was the firmware developed? And vendors are going to have to be thinking about, for each of these components, where am I developing this? Is this a global offering that, we do somewhere else, that now we're going to have to think about either shoring or reshoring resources in order to support whatever that region's idea of supply chain security means? And how do we do that as a company? And what does that look like for integration with our teams that do global product offerings? And then thirdly, is the cryptography. So when we're doing things that rely on robust cryptography as they should, different regions of the world are likely going to start asking for unique keys. They're going to want to be doing their own cryptography because there's going to be this kind of increased inherent distrust in cryptography keys that might have been developed somewhere that they may see as a threat to their digital sovereignty. So like the H-bomb, S-bomb, F-bomb, vendors are going to have to start thinking about making sure that they're able to do these dedicated cryptography offerings in different areas of the world that all meet our security standards as a, kind of in that line of business or in that product offering. And I want to make a point here that generally when we talk about supply chain security for ICS vendors, this is kind of where the conversation ends. And I would argue that that's just the absolute beginning of the conversation, because afterwards you still have all this. You still have every person in every team that supports your secure development lifecycle for these products. You have, everyone from your executive leadership all the way down to third-party vendors that you use, and they are also going to be very inherently affected by this. So on the executive leadership side, you can imagine how hard it is, for current CISOs and CIPSOs, for chief product security officers, to juggle everything related to even a global product offering. And as these things start to diverge, and all of a sudden we have within one product offering, we have one set of bill of materials for North America, South America, China, Russia, Europe. Having the knowledge and wherewithal to be the umbrella for all of those is going to get increasingly difficult and possibly unrealistic for very, very large vendors to deal with. So what I anticipate us seeing in the future is kind of a dedicated slicing of the executive leadership structure, and instead you're going to start seeing large companies having, a dedicated CIPSO possibly for North America, for South America, for China, for Russia, and for these different spaces. And those people aren't just going to need to be, very aware of anything that is unique about those product offerings. They're also going to need to serve as the subject matter experts for the company for what the policies in those regions are regarding supply chain security and what is expected of us as vendors in that region in order to support whatever that region's ideal of supply chain security for their critical infrastructure is. And in addition to your executive leadership, you're also going to need this to a degree within your product security teams. So this may not look like an individual product security team for each region. It might. I think a more realistic thing would look like you would have dedicated points of contact on your product security teams that are kind of specialists in very broad regions. So you would have a person on your product security team who is charged with being, kind of the SME for North America and how we're handling, product security strategies in those regions and really supporting your CIPSOs in those, kind of strategies and offerings. But where this really gets interesting is your vulnerability handlers and your emergency response teams. So your vulnerability handlers are going to have to be aware not only of everything that your global offerings have, so everything in those bills of materials, but also everything kind of in these lines that are going to pop up of, to use the US as an example, say I have a protective relay that, we have a global offering version of, but say in the next 5 years, we all of a sudden need to develop this, because of policy reasons, an Americanized version of it. All of a sudden, if a security researcher calls us and says, hey, I think I found something with this, now the vulnerability handlers are not only going to have to validate this for the global offering, they're also going to have to validate it for the Americanized version. And that can be, across the board for any different region that we have to do this. And I'm just using the US because it's easy. But you're going to need vulnerability handlers who, like those product security team members and like CIPSOs, are going to have very dedicated, unique knowledge into these kind of fragmented product lines within the same products. And I think that's going to make things very interesting for vendors, because we're going to have to all of a sudden keep a much broader database of everything in every single one of the offerings in order to, robustly be able to validate, is this just a problem in, a global offering of something, or is this going to be a problem in every different offering that we may have adjusted bills of materials for in order to meet regional supply chain needs. And this kind of goes hand in hand with your emergency response people. Based on my time at Fire, I think sometimes it's very easy for us to get spoiled and think of, people like the Chris Strunks and them of the world who, do incident response, and they travel all over. And we get spoiled and we think, oh, we can send people anywhere. We have customers all over, we can send them into different plants. But I would bet that everyone on this call, no matter where you are in the world, can think of a scenario where you would have an incident regarding a very sensitive critical infrastructure site. And there are regions of the world that wouldn't be welcomed as emergency or incident responders in those sites. That, whether it was a policy level or, just a decision made on the ground, someone would raise an eyebrow and say, well, I'm not entirely sure that that's actually a secure thing for us to do, to have emergency responders coming from that geographical region into, say, our nuclear plant. So for the vendors as well, with our emergency response teams, and this also goes for non-ICS vendors, also especially for the services side of ICS security industry as a whole, I think we're going to really start seeing services teams and incident response teams especially start to really be sliced up, that you're going to need dedicated people that, are able to operate more regionally, as opposed to having kind of more centric teams that are able to, work pretty agilely globally. And then at the end of kind of our ladder is the development teams. So the first thing you have to do, or one of the very first things you have to do whenever you triage a vulnerability. So someone calls up and says, hey, I think I found something, I need to talk to someone about this, is we have them send a proof of concept, and it has to be validated. And this, as with, doing the vulnerability handling, is going to create some issues for your dev teams if all of a sudden you're trying to figure out, they said that this was, this relay, and I'm just using protective relays as an example, because this is what I worked with mainly at Oak Ridge. But they're going to, submit a vulnerability, and we're going to have to send it to the dev team and say, is this something that is affecting, just this version of this, or is this affecting, again, all of these kind of dedicated lines of this specific product? If you had a balkanized version of it or an Americanized version, and then having to do coordinated disclosures within each of those regions if it was something that was affected across the board. Okay, good, I'm done. And then the last one that I really wanted to talk about is our partners. So no one does this alone. Even huge ICS security vendors don't do this alone. We have tons of industry partners, tons of security partners. And this is going to be, I joke about this, that this is the chocolate chip cookie problem. So you can imagine that, there's tensions geopolitically between country A and country B. And I am trying to sell something to country B, or we have products with country B. But country A has some really amazing solutions that they want to partner with us with. And all of a sudden it becomes this issue of, how many chocolate chips from country A can, you feasibly think about offering as part of a product before country B raises its hand and says, oh, no, I don't want that cookie. So we're really also having to start to think about this from a third-party vendor standpoint of, strategically looking at, who is offering what from a security solutions standpoint or a security services standpoint, and who is able to possibly be the most, kind of Switzerland in this space. If I am, looking at two different solutions and one of them is going to be, unacceptable to certain countries, how do I work around that? How do I make this something that we can use the technology to the benefit of the security for our customers and not have it get, way stopped at the door because it came from a certain region of the world? And so what's next? What do we do about this? So what I would like to argue as kind of their next steps is anticipate, inform, monitor, and innovate. So we need to be thinking about this now. At the end of the day is the kind of point here, is that even if executive orders are being reworked and certain things haven't come down the pipeline yet, I think it's safe to say that they will. And we should be thinking about those things now with our teams. And we need to inform both our teams and our leaderships that this is something that we're going to have to plan for, essentially. And one of the best ways, I think, to do that is to monitor current policy, monitor kind of which way the winds are blowing in different regions of the world that this is kind of particularly a flashpoint in. I know when I was discussing this with Jennifer on our pre-SANS call, one of the points that we had kind of actually arrived in that call was that this could be a great thing to ask your cyber threat intelligence partners for. So if you have a cyber threat intelligence offering, ask them, say, hey, do you support informing us when there is, supply chain policy change in different parts of the world? I know it's not, kind of traditional threat intelligence of, here's a breach, here's the IOCs, but I think this is something that could really be valuable to teams, and that, cyber threat intelligence, kind of shops are pretty uniquely positioned to be very tactically good at providing that information outwards to people that they may not, internally be monitoring already. And then also be innovative. This is going to be a problem that really takes some creativity, I think, on all of our parts to work around, whether that be figuring out where you are able to put assets so that you can support things regionally, or if you are going to try to be supporting things more globally, trying to figure out, where maybe is your kind of Switzerland that you can put teams that will be a little bit more geographically able to move around within some of these areas that have tensions. And really just trying to come up with creative ways for, people within your spaces that you work in to, again, as the global community, really help provide the best security that we can for our customers and populations living in different regions of the world, as some of these policies change and put up roadblocks for us. Okay. So conclusions, I had some final thoughts on this. Again, that the future is going to require vendors to increasingly engineer secure solutions through the lens of distrustful geopolitics. We at the end of the day don't have control over governments. We don't have control over who trusts who. All that we have control over is how do we support our customers and how do we support cybersecurity in those regions. And the security of ICS has global effects. I mean, that's why we have a Follow the Sun SANS ICS conference this year, because this is such a global issue and it really requires this global security mindset. And then finally, this is going to present challenges for security practitioners and practitioners along kind of all stages of your security development lifecycle. And everyone within that ladder really has to be part of the solution in order to make this jive well for everyone. And I think I'm good on time. I think so. Yes, we have time for questions. Would love to take them.
I will take one from the hallway, and then Rob, I don't know if you were popping in to ask a question, but one that came in is just kind of in regards to considering the talk and the pressures and the challenges that the OEMs are going to start facing, I looked at this question and started wondering it myself, what's the best way to manage it? So this, do you envision vendors are going to have to start considering downsizing their market in order to consolidate their expertise on the key customer geographies where they need to comply and they need to make sure that they can meet the standards and regulations there? So there's going to become this kind of drive towards areas that aren't supported, meaning you won't intentionally kind of have capabilities in some spaces depending on what their specific regs or standards are.
Sure. No, I mean, that's a fantastic question. My gut answer to that is no, actually. I think at least in my mind, the solution to that would more likely look like investing in regional subject matter experts. So having, whether they're internal employees or having contractors that are people that would be regionally there on the ground to support and provide that expertise, even if we didn't necessarily, as a vendor, have, kind of that massive team to do it ourselves. But again, that's off the cuff, so don't hold Schneider to that.
Of course not. Understood. Well, thank you very much, Rob. Did you have anything that you wanted? I can tell you there's a request for you to post a link on where to purchase that lamp. In the background, we had similar requests for the jackalope in Paul Stockton's presentation on day one.
So there's a couple over here in the chat, but one I'm curious about while I find the other one was as it relates to things you mentioned, kind of F-bomb, S-bomb, H-bomb, but as we really dig into things like S-bomb and think about what's in our products, obviously not speaking on behalf of all Schneider Electric, but just how do you all think through that? And are you kind of working on it already? Because there are plenty of regulations and things that I think are coming. And it's curious on kind of how y'all addressing it.
Yeah, so SBOM's a huge thing. And that is definitely an area that we're working very hard on. Again, I've only been at Schneider about 2 months. So,
Tell me all of the secrets, Mags. Yeah. No, I gotcha.
I don't know all of them yet because it's been drinking from a Schneider secret fire hose. Yeah. But no, I mean, it's definitely, and that was a joke, by the way. So legal doesn't come after me. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a huge initiative and something that, we've been working really hard on is, especially even from the aspect of, internally having, very, very, very robust SBOMs so that when someone, like Reed calls us and says, hey, I think there's an issue in this product, being able to very quickly go, okay, where else is X used across the company? And that's hugely important to, any vendor, really. I mean, it was something that we worked with, a bunch of different vendors with the lab of, being able to figure out where things are used so that it's not just, having an SBOM so that we can check the compliance box when the policy that's coming down the pipe comes in. I think the bigger use for SBOMs from a product security standpoint is being able to very quickly sweep and go, okay, we think there's a supply chain issue because a vulnerability came in from ICS cert with X product, and very quickly being able to kind of snap the finger and go, okay, so it affects XYZ, but not B or Q, and kind of very quickly be able to turn those things around for customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And then kind of the last question on that topic, have you all, or maybe it's not fair in the 2 months to say have you all, but can you see Schneider finding vulnerabilities or seeing vulnerabilities in other product lines, doing the SBOM check, finding that it's in your product lines as well, because, code assist or whatever else, and then issuing advisories on that? Because I know that's a traditional pain point for a lot of community where Rockwell will post something, but Emerson or Siemens or whoever else has the exact same issue, but doesn't post anything. Like, have there been discussions about that piece of it?
Yeah, I mean, so I haven't been in discussions specifically about that, so full disclaimer. But I do know that we're trying pretty hard to be, kind of forward leaning on making sure that we're getting things out with the whole Citrix program. It was kind of a peeve of mine at the lab sometimes with different, different people. It was hard to kind of, get a scope of what was going on in different places if you were looking into different products, which was a huge reason why I said yes when Megan called and said, will you come work with Schneider? Because they did seem to be kind of one of the more forward-leaning ones as far as wanting to get that stuff out.
No, that's fantastic. Y'all have a great team, so I'm excited to see what y'all will put out and do. All right, well, thank you for coming and presenting and for being here with us. You've got plenty to jump into over in the chat, so thanks again, Megs.
Yep, thank you guys so much.